you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Delaware Association of Realtors Annual Legislative and Regulatory Forum. This is our chance to report to you all that has happened over the last 9 months and to give you a preview of what's to come next year. My name is George Thomason, and I am the chair of the DAR Public Policy Committee. And I'm joined with me today, Jamie Clough, our DAR's Director of Government Affairs. Later on, you'll hear from our DAR legal counsel, Andy Taylor, about regulatory updates. But first, we are joined by a representative from the National Association of Realtors, Daria Dudzinski. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. If you know, as you well know, the National Association of Realtors and state and local associations work together through what we call the three-way agreement. In advocacy, this agreement allows the National Association to focus on federal government advocacy, DAR, in our case, to focus on state government, and local associations to focus on county and municipal government advocacy. We each have a role to play and to make sure that advocacy in the Realtor organization is consistent and organized. Daria is the new NAR political representative assigned to Delaware, and we are excited to have her join us today. Welcome, Daria.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Go right ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Daria Dudzinski, and I am your new political representative for Delaware. And although I'm new to NAR, I've been in the real estate industry for about 8 years now. So I'm really familiar with the industry's policy concerns and the challenges you're facing right now. So let's get right into it. To start out, a bit of a look back. In 2022, we saw a lot of wins for the industry. At the forefront of that was securing $50 billion in emergency rental assistance and streamlining the administration of this fund. We also saw a crucial bipartisan transportation bill. We saw increased funding for affordable housing, fair housing, and many other programs that NAR cares about. Another big win was the introduction of the More Homes on the Market Act. This is an important tax bill that doubles the current exclusion of capital gains when a homeowner sells. And lastly, of course, we had the Inflation Reduction Act. This was a bit of a defensive play on our end, and we were able to keep out a lot of the harmful tax provisions that were proposed in this package, like changes to 1031 like-kind exchanges, stepped up basis, capital gains, etc. Now looking forward, as you know, NAR strives to ensure the American dream for all Americans, achieving homeownership. And to work towards this, we're focusing on the following policy areas this Congress. Those would be fiscal issues like the debt limit and government funding, tax policy, housing supply, and fair housing. Now, diving into fiscal issues where we have quite a few approaching deadlines. And this will help set the stage of the current political and legislative landscape we're navigating. With both the House and Senate back in session after their August recess, there is a lot to get done. The number one item on Congress's to-do list, as many of you may know, is passing an appropriations legislation to keep the government funded before the new fiscal year begins. The current government funding runs out on Saturday, so this is a fast approaching deadline. And if Congress does not pass government funding, there will be a government shutdown, and this will have serious consequences. And NAR is of the mindset that if it impacts the economy, it will impact our membership. And there are several government programs that rely on an appropriations bill for their funding. One of these programs is the National Flood Insurance Program, which is of particular importance to our membership. So needless to say, there is a lot riding on the spending deal. Factions in both the House and the Senate have been challenging legislation being brought to the floor. There's a lot of debate over the inclusion of border security funding and aid for Ukraine. This is an ever-evolving area, so I've been trying my best to give you the most real-time updates. As of today, the Senate is working on a continuing resolution. This would be a 45-day short-term solution that would allow the government to stay open. So the Senate is trying to keep this resolution clean or as straightforward as possible. They're trying to exclude any border security funding, disaster relief funds, or aid to Ukraine. Senate leaders just want to make it as easy as possible for this to pass in the House. But still, there is even skepticism on whether or not even a clean resolution will pass in the House. On top of this, House Speaker McCarthy has launched an official impeachment inquiry into President Biden. So there's certainly a lot of play right now and some distractions from getting that spending deal across the finish line. Diving into taxes, an area we continue to work on are the 23 Tax Cuts and Job Act provisions that are set to expire at the end of 2025. So these include SALT, the child tax credit increase will phase out, and the reduction of income tax rates. And moving on to housing supply. Sorry. And then I think just one more slide.
There we go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, housing supply is at the core of our advocacy work. Not only housing affordability, but its availability. And we're hearing from NAR members in both urban and rural communities that supply is a huge constraint. So much so, NAR estimates that the US has an underbuilding gap of at least 5.5 million housing units over the last 20 years. But fortunately, this is a bipartisan issue here in Washington, and there are a lot of tax-related solutions. Some of these being updates to capital gains exclusion, tax credits like LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit, or the middle-income housing tax credit. So there's a lot of ideas out there. It's also worth noting that in Washington, there's a lot of interest building in commercial conversions. And as always, we're working to steer lawmakers away from band-aid solutions like rent control. Members may be seeing these initiatives popping up on the state and local level, and now that's becoming the case on the federal level. It's really gaining traction on the Hill. And pivoting to fair housing, we, of course, are continuing our work on the fair housing front to reauthorize and increase funding for HUD's fair housing enforcement programs. And we continue to urge Congress to support legislation that closes the homeownership gaps among demographic groups. And then I thought what would be helpful would be to pivot to a political update. So pivoting from legislative now to a political. And I just wanted to include a couple of key stats to highlight how well positioned RPAC is. Last year, we had a 97.9% win rate on RPAC supported candidates. So we had a really incredible year. And this is a testament to our state and national trustees who take their job very seriously and picked really strong candidates for us to support. And as always, a reminder of our bipartisanship. RPAC gave 50% of funds to each political party. Bipartisanship is something that continues to be a priority within NAR, And having worked in DC a long time, this is not always the case for trade associations. And so it should definitely be a point of pride, especially during an impending government shutdown. I think it's a reminder of how important bipartisanship is. And lastly, our number of federal candidates are PAC supported, which is 418. Just another really amazing figure. Now, looking ahead, what can we expect in 2024? The Senate is going to be challenging for Democrats. 20 senators are up for re-election in 2024. So there's a big question of whether or not they can maintain control. And there's similar uncertainty for Republicans in the House. They have a lot of districts to defend. Right now, there are about 18 rare purple congressional districts, or districts where the race is considered a toss-up or highly competitive. So you'll definitely see both Democrats and Republicans focusing on these districts and using significant campaign resources there. And we can guess that there will likely be thin margins for both parties in both chambers. So we'll see, again, challenges when it comes to passing legislation. And of course, the big headline in 2024 is the presidential election. Presidential primaries will begin as early as this coming March. And just a reminder, a question that comes up a lot during this time: NAR does not endorse presidential candidates in the race. We stay completely out of that. So just a quick reminder of that. So I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for having me. My contact information is on the screen, and always happy to be a resource and answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Daria. We're going to save questions and answers towards the end of this presentation. So if you have questions for Daria, please enter them into the chat or use the raise your hand function during the Q&A session. So once again, thank you for joining us, Daria.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to what's happening at the state level. We're going to provide some updates on the first half of the 152nd General Assembly. To start, here's an overview of some of our lobbying efforts. To begin, it's important to remind everybody what we advocate for. Essentially, our mission is twofold: to promote and strengthen homeownership and to protect private property rights. The DER Public Policy Committee met and reviewed over 40 individual pieces of legislation during this first session. As of now, the Public Policy Committee has actively supported 15 bills, is currently opposing 5, and monitoring 25. What this means, briefly, is that if the committee decides to support a bill, we will use our resources to help legislators pass said bill. If we oppose, we will use our resources as well as resources from the national level to do just that, to oppose the bill. And if we're monitoring the bill, it very much depends on how the legislature proceeds. If the bill is amended in a way that we like, we will possibly join the efforts to support that bill. If it is amended in a way that we do not like, we will join the opposition of that bill and marshal our resources to that effort. We launched 2 major calls for action this year. One centered around the realty transfer tax, the other on a short-term rental tax. We will discuss both of those later, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for all those who participated and helped us prevent the short-term rental tax from progressing. If you did not receive those calls for action, we ask that you pull out your phone now and text realtors to the number 30644. This way you will register for the Realtor Party mobile alerts. Don't worry, we're not going to sell your phone number to anybody, and we're not going to be blowing up your phone with text messages or alerts. This is our way of getting in touch with you and letting you know that there is a call for action either at the local, state, or national level.
Okay. This year, we hosted a fantastic legislative action day. We offered lunch to our legislators and their staff and used that time to talk about our legislative priorities. Thank you to those who attended and helped educate our elected officials. Over the course of the session, we provided testimony multiple times in committee meetings expressing our support or opposition to bills. I personally gave testimony 4 times, and a few of our members assisted from time to time. Now, if you seek a full list of the bills that we are engaged with, look for the DAR email titled 2023 End of Legislative Session Report. That email was sent out on July 24th, and if you can't find it, we can forward it to you. Just write a message in the chat. Jamie?
Okay, moving on to the realty transfer tax. DAR is committed to reducing the highest transfer tax in the nation. It is a clear detriment to those trying to buy or sell a home. Thanks to those, again, who participated in our call for action. We had a fantastic response rate, and we're told by numerous legislators that they felt our impact and heard your voices. We have lobbied in support of House Bill 36, sponsored by Representative Bill Bush. His bill aims to lower the realty transfer tax by 1%, and we will continue to seek additional support of that bill, which is supported by both Democrats and Republicans. We also lobbied in support of 2 bills that did pass, that expanded relief for the realty transfer tax. SB 120 allows county workforce and affordable housing programs to be funded by the proceeds of the realty transfer tax. And Senate Substitute 1 for Senate Bill 87 clarifies that properties that are intended for affordable housing programs are exempt from the realty transfer tax. Now, it's important that we are truthful with you. Passing a reduction in the realty transfer tax is a tough ask. While we know how important it is, the amount of dollars that it would take for the state budget is the biggest hindrance and the main reason why legislators are not budging. We will continue the good fight, but it's going to be a long road ahead. We are working on some other resources, so please keep an eye out for new resources that we will be providing members to help engage your clients. Most only understand the impact of the tax at certain points. When reviewing finances before buying or selling a property, and when they are sitting at settlement. We're going to be working on resources to help engage your clients at those key moments of the transaction. And next, we will go to George.
All right, thank you, Jamie. The next topic is the short-term rental tax. During this session, a bill was introduced that would institute an 8% short-term rental tax in the state of Delaware. This bill would classify any rental under 150 days as a short-term rental and place an additional state tax aside from what local municipalities or counties already have. We worked very hard to raise awareness for this bill and to prevent it from passing. With the help of our membership through a call to action, we were able to keep this bill in committee. Having prevented the bill from passing in June, we quickly got to work to address the new tax. Volunteers from the Public Policy Committee and our good friends at the Sussex County Association of Realtors met to formulate a response to the tax and list changes that we feel are required for us to not actively oppose this bill. We are meeting with legislators throughout the fall and winter to express our concerns regarding this bill, and we'll keep you and the rest of our membership informed on any updates. It's important to note that the state budget is going to come up short next year. While we all have opinions on how our tax dollars should be spent, legislators are going to be seeking ways to find further funding to close the budget gaps and continue to fund the programs that already exist. And unfortunately, that means a possible tax on short-term rentals. Back to you, Jamie.
Okay. This year, there was a concerted effort to promote a series of bills that are aimed to reduce the time it takes for a real estate construction permit to be approved. These 4 bills were called the Ready in 6 bills. And the Public Policy Committee voted to support. They were called Ready in 6 because the goal is to be able to break ground within 6 months. House Bill 102 and 104 were signed by the governor, and House Bill 101 and 103 are still in committee. While the bills have not moved at this time, the other two did and have already been signed by the governor. The two that passed, HB 102 and 104, focused on expediting the issuance of a temporary entrance permit for commercial and economic development projects, and provides exemptions from the state's for the state's plus process, which is the state's pre-application process for land use. Oops. Excuse me. Moving on to preparing for 2024. The Public Policy Committee came together to create a series of task forces to address our legislative priorities for the coming year. The realty transfer tax remains on our list of top priorities going into 2024. We are working with Representative Bush to support his bill to lower the tax, as well as raise public awareness and pressure. As always, please keep an eye on your inbox for more developments and ways to be involved. The short-term rental tax remains a top priority as well for the Public Policy Committee, and we are meeting with stakeholders as well as the bill sponsors so that our concerns are addressed. We are also proposing new legislation in the form of a statewide landlord and tenants' rights and responsibilities guide. This guide would essentially provide a single resource of all the state mandated disclosures. We are proposing it be drafted through the Real Estate Commission with the help of all interested parties, including ourselves. Moving on, across the country, state and local legislators are examining the practice of wholesaling in the real estate industry. DAR is included on the list of associations that believe if you practice buying or selling real estate, then you must have a real estate license. We also seek further disclosure when conducting the practice. The bill we are proposing would require wholesalers to have a real estate license and to do their due diligence in informing their potential clients on the practice of wholesaling. Lastly, we are ramping up our state political coordinator program. The goal is for each legislator to have someone in their district to act as a friendly face and liaison for DAR. If you are interested in becoming an SPC or learning more about the program, we are having a SPC boot camp scheduled in early December. Please reach out to me. You will see my contact information later on. And if you would like to attend, and we will get you on the registration list.
Great job, Jamie. Thank you. That concludes the legislative portion of our forum. I now turn to DAR's legal counsel, Andy Taylor, to give us an update on the regulatory changes. Andy? Andy, you there?
My screen share is loading. Is that showing yet?
Yeah, we see it.
All right. There you go. Can you still see it there?
You're good.
Yep.
All right, good, excellent. So Andy Taylor here, pleasure to be with you today, give you some update, regulatory and whatnot. First of all, a comment on the commercial conversions that was mentioned during the national political update. You may have heard that newer office buildings are harder to convert to apartments than older apartment buildings. Well, I suppose that means that some of the older office buildings in Wilmington are now a blessing. And you may know years ago, the old Delaware Trust building was converted to apartments, and very recently now, the 901 Market Tower building, that's just about completed for conversion to 82 apartments units, rooftop amenities, retail on the first floor. The 913 building next door is being converted, and there's more floors of the old DuPont Nemours building are being converted to apartments. So some good things going on there. A reminder here that I represent you. I do not represent the Delaware Real Estate Commission. The Real Estate Commission is represented by the Delaware Attorney General's office. So there's a deputy AG assigned to the Real Estate Commission. Because I attend so many of the real estate commission meetings. Sometimes people get confused about that, but I'm not confused. I represent you. All right, seller impersonation, not really regulation update, but just to let you know, in case you didn't see the flash update that came out from DAR, now the fraudsters who are impersonating sellers are actually showing up physically in person at your real estate office. A few weeks ago, there was an email from a Delaware State Trooper. She was investigating this type of case that had happened. So now you have to be on the guard for not only sellers impersonating someone as a seller through the internet, email, chat, maybe even Zoom, whatever. Now they're actually showing up in person at your office. So do everything you can to verify somebody's identity. And we're working on looking at some technology solutions to that for you. I assume you're all familiar with the brokers teams and education rule changes that took place over the past few years, but to review a couple things of very importance with you. The broker responsibility, the Real Estate Commission continues to emphasize the importance of the broker's responsibility in supervising your licensees, which in my view has never been more difficult in the world. They're not only independent contractors, but not coming into the office, et cetera, et cetera. Big caution for you on continuing education. And I'll slow down here to make sure I really consider this important. If your licensee doesn't have CE and renews anyway, you will be summoned for a hearing. You'll have to go through that with a hearing officer. You will most likely then be fined $500 and receive a letter of reprimand. I hear there may be some court appeals that some brokers are going to file on this. So we'll see if any of those are successful, but imagine that. I know one broker, he didn't even know that person was even still licensed with him. So you might want to get in touch with the Real Estate Commission, pay to get a list of the licensees who are licensed under you, check that list, and see then about monitoring their continuing education compliance. The rules still say you have to co-sign a CE log, which is interesting because, as you know, the renewal's all done electronically. You do have to keep copies of the CE certificates for at least 3 years, so that can be paper or electronic. And the Real Estate Commission has pretty much said the only way to avoid that $500 fine and letter of reprimand is to actually terminate the licensee prior to April 30th if that licensee has not completed CE. They appear to not want to hear any excuses. So there's your warning on that. Advertising, as you know, the revisions to the advertising rules are that the advertisement has to prominently display the brokerage organization name and phone number in greater size and visibility than the licensee's name. We still haven't heard what the Real Estate Commission intends to do of how to handle the 40-some complaints or so that are pending in front of them for violation of these advertising rules. So even though you may not have heard of discipline on that recently, stay tuned and make sure your licensees continue to comply with the advertising requirements. Skip over the property management part right now. All right. Revisions to the seller's disclosure forms. DAR had a significant input to the revisions to the seller's disclosure form. The Real Estate Commission sent a letter to DAR in June of 2022 asking for our input on the seller's disclosure forms. We invited input from all members. The DAR Forms Committee is very diligent in reviewing all of those comments. I think I saw earlier, I was seeing, I think Bruce Plummer is on the meeting today. Bruce is a key member of your Forms Committee. It's a very active, hardworking committee with representation in all 3 counties. And so we reviewed all the comments from members, made suggestions then to the real estate subcommittee. They approved most all of the DAR suggestion, added more of their others. I attended all those subcommittee meetings and literally read every word of the seller's disclosure form to them because I wanted them to slow down, actually consider everything carefully. It's not perfect, we know that, but it keeps getting better. So they approved that. They're now working on the new construction disclosure form and the vacant form. As you know, the seller's disclosure is required under Title VI of the Delaware Code in the consumer protection statutes under the Buyer Property Protection Act, and the Real Estate Commission has responsibility for the forms. So, you know, there are certain exemptions, but let's review just briefly for you. I'm sure you've heard and reviewed yourself some of the revisions, but let me go over just some of the highlights with you. On each page before each section, it was added to say seller shall answer all the following questions based on seller's knowledge of the property. We continue to fight against the idea of somebody saying a seller should have known something. So we're trying to make it clear the seller's basing their answers on their knowledge of the property. More places then were highlighted to remind a seller, if you answered yes to this question, then add a description of that in section 16 towards the end. Some things were just reworded. We added some more links to additional information, for example, concerning the availability of flood insurance for the property. And that was actually very good work by Wes and Jamie and the Public Policy Committee. Sometimes there members of the General Assembly who say, well, we want to have a new form to, advise people about flood insurance or advise people about snow removal on sidewalks or whatever. And fortunately, DAR has been very effective at convincing those legislators that the better way to handle that, rather than a separate legislation and a separate disclosure form piece of paper, that to just put it in the Real Estate Commission seller's disclosure form. So that's some of that was some of the changes you see here as well. There were a very good deletion actually was deleted a question that was much too broad about, is there anything else you should disclose to a prospective buyer because it may materially and adversely affect the property. That was just too broad. Unfortunately, some lawyers are having too much fun with that question. So that question has been narrowed. Have you received formal notice of any changes that may materially or adversely affect the property, e.g. zoning changes, road changes, proposed utility changes? So makes it more of a actual knowledge standard there. As I mentioned before, a note was added about trying to check responsibility for installation of sidewalks. A question was added about did you participate in the CARES Act or any of the COVID related forbearance provisions that may have added a second mortgage to the back of, and so that was put in there. The mold question was modernized some to make it more accurate. Mold is everywhere, but just asking, has the property been tested for mold, rather than asking, is there currently mold in the property? The question that was for the pest provision, you may have seen the title was added, the word wildlife was added to that, rather than just termites and other dry rot and pests. And so there was a lot of discussion among the Real Estate Commission and also the Forms Committee about what type of wildlife should be mentioned. It was required through something else that bats be addressed. So there's a question about are there now ever been bat colonies on the property? But as far as other wildlife, Commission decided to not go further than just asking, has there been damage to the property caused by not only insects now, but wildlife? So, they're not just asking every time there may have been a groundhog on the property, but is it wildlife that's actually caused damage to the property is the concern for that. So I think that was a good discussion by the Commission coming out there where that is. So the provisions for what the condition is of the items on the property, and refrigerators, microwaves, etc. Those boxes, some things were added to that. The Forms Committee is well aware that we try to keep those boxes consistent then with what's on the listing agreement and the agreement of sale. So as those forms come up for revision, those will be updated with that. Just a little bit of conclusion here before I talk about some of the litigation that's pending concerning NAR. My attitude, one of the few things I can control, other than that, it's maybe what tea I drink in the morning. But my attitude, yep, I try to be positive and help make things happen for the brokerage community in Delaware. So let me go back to try to stop that screen share there. Hold on here. All right. Here we go. All right, welcome back. As you know, there is litigation pending concerning agency and concerning the National Association of Realtors. And so we are on top of monitoring those and talking about those among certain task forces within DAR. It may lead to some changes on the buyer agency agreement. It may lead to some discussions with the Delaware Real Estate Commission about whether the Licensing Act or the rules and regulations need to be revised or not. So just rest assured, we're on top of trying to keep track of that throughout the country. Everything, some of it's pretty fast moving. There's a trial in one of the cases that's scheduled for mid-October. A couple of parties have settled on that, but we don't know the particulars of what the settlement terms were. So once that becomes approved by the judge and more public, that might give us some guidance as to what we might look to do here locally. So that's that. Stay tuned. We'll share additional information as it becomes reliable information becomes available. And with that, I'm going to pause here at George. I don't know if there's any time for questions or anything, but
Sure. Well, thank you, Andy, for that report. I would now like to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please type it in the chat so we can record your question, or use the raise my hand function so that we can call on you. We also welcome, never mind, nobody else is joining us. Anyway, let us know if you have a question. Jamie?
Not seeing any questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised.
All right, then.
Well,
Well,
real quick,
We get a
George.
few minutes here. Anybody?
there's Wes. Okay.
Yeah,
Welcome,
hello.
Wes Stefanik, our CEO.
Thank you. Daria, did you want to address any of Sandra's, any of that question that she had put in the chat? Any more context to that?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Sandra, for that question. Something I should have outlined. So the More Homes on the Market Act is unfortunately not passed. It was introduced in March, and NAR is working to get some more co-sponsors on that and hopefully gain enough traction that it'll be introduced in committee. But it does update exclusions from 250,000 to 550,000 for single filers, and then increases it to 1 million for joint filers. So just some context on that.
Okay, thank you, Daria.
Of course.
Do we have any other questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised or anyone typing questions in the chat.
Okay, well, folks, thank you. That concludes.
We got
our
one question.
Okay, how about it?
Can Andy elaborate more on the pending case with NAR and what it would mean for Delaware agents?
Sure. Well, first of all, there was actually a good win on a case just about a month ago or so. Some people referred to as the Rex case. That was a case that dealt with a brokerage that had a business model of operating outside of the multiple listing service. That's great. Competition's a good thing. Always in favor of people trying out different business models and see where it takes them. And what happened was Zillow changed how they were loading listings into their system. They became members of multiple listing services. They followed the rules of not basically commingling listings that came through MLSs with listings that came from private MLSs. So they had two tabs on Zillow, and you needed to click on the alternative one to see listings from other sources. Rec sued based on this, including Zillow and NAR, claiming that this had anti-competitive consequences and violated antitrust laws. NAR was dismissed from that lawsuit, so that was a complete win there. The rules were found to be pro-competitive and not to be violating antitrust laws there. So that was one aspect. Then the one that's coming up for trial in October, this is a class action lawsuit by sellers, claiming that, in a sense, them automatically paying buyer's agents caused them to overpay on their commission, and that's kind of in a nutshell what that's about. So that's led to increased emphasis on the importance of having a buyer counseling session, talking with their buyer about the services that you offer, offering to them a written buyer agency agreement. As you know, in Delaware, under our presumed consent to agency and presumed consent to dual agency, you don't need a written buyer agency agreement unless you're asking the buyer to enter into an exclusive relationship with you, or you're asking the buyer to pay you compensation. But that's what we might look to needing to change depending upon how this litigation comes out, or even what the settlement agreements say with the parties that decide to settle on those cases. So that's a little bit of a thumbnail sketch for you, and NAR has some pretty good summaries out there you can find through their website as well.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Anyone else?
I think there's a attachment to that question. How can we find buyer's agents? Not sure if that's best for you, Andy.
Not exactly sure of the question, but any licensee in Delaware through their broker is authorized to represent buyers. And so it's a matter of company policy, company business model as to what services that brokerage organization chooses to offer. Seller agency, buyer agency, disclosed dual agency. It's up to the company policy as to how that's handled by the brokerage organization.
Okay. Anyone else?
I got a question. Daria, would you mind expanding a bit more on what's going on with rent control?
Yeah. So rent control is gaining a lot more traction on the federal level. Some federal agencies are opening up requests for information, public requests for information, because they are looking to take action on how to either offer carrots or sticks to implement rent control policies. So the Federal Housing Finance Agency recently opened up a request for information because they're looking to enforce rent control policies on any federally backed mortgage properties. So they wanted to get input from advocates and also the industry. So definitely over the summer, we were seeing that pop up more and more on the federal level. And does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not seeing any hands raised or any new questions being typed into the chat.
Okay, going once.
Yeah, you answered my question.
There we go. What's your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Do you have a question for us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Nope.
Okay.
Probably not.
We
I
have-
will
we-
follow up with
obviously
him
technical issues
offline.
there. Do you have anything else, Jamie?
No, I don't have any
Okay.
questions or any hands raised at the moment.
All right, very good. Well, Everyone, thank you very much. This concludes our Legislative and Regulatory Forum. Thank you for attending today and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.